In this video, we're going to talk about how to make 100 plus horsepower, both 100 plus crank horsepower and 100 plus wheel horsepower on a VA WRX. That means if it's a 2015 through 2021 WRX, I'm going to tell you guys exactly what you need to do to make 100 plus horsepower on your car. This is an exact playbook. Let's say you buy one or you have one and you're like, I want to make more than 100 horsepower, and these are the few parts that I need to buy and do. I'm going to give you guys exactly what that is. Yes, this is my 2022 WRX, but I've owned 3 VA WRXs. Now, if you're a subscriber to the channel, I just let something go because you guys probably know that I've owned a 2015 and a 2016. Well, there's a bit of a surprise that's coming to the channel very soon, but I will let you stay guessing on that. But just because it's about 10 degrees right now where I'm filming, we're gonna jump into the car and take it for a ride, and I'm gonna give you guys the exact playbook. And I promise this isn't the only VA content coming to the channel, because I may or may not have made a really stupid purchase that includes something with a blown engine. But if you guys wanna see that, there's a button like right below me that you're gonna have to press that says subscribe, because you're gonna have to get notified when that comes to the channel, and that's all I'm going to tell you. But there is some crazy stuff coming to the channel, quite literally the craziest thing that I've ever done on this channel or in my life probably, and you guys are going to be the first to see it. So if you press that button, it's free, by the way, to press the subscribe button, and let's hop into the car, get out of the cold, and I'm going to give you guys an exact playbook to making both 100 crank horsepower, 100 plus crank horsepower, and 100 plus wheel horsepower, because yes, those two things are different. We'll talk about it and why. All right, so you wanted to make 100 wheel horsepower or 100 horsepower on your VA WRX. We're gonna do a quick lesson on horsepower. So what's the difference between crank horsepower and wheel horsepower? Because that matters. Crank horsepower is the horsepower that your engine creates at its crank. That is the advertised horsepower. That's the horsepower that when you buy your car, that's what's listed on the car. For the VA WRX, that's 268 horsepower. Wheel horsepower is the actual horsepower that is your car is delivering as the wheels make impact on the pavement, which means it's gone through all of its losses. Now, what does that mean? When your car generates power at the crank, at the engine, it then has to translate and push that power through your drivetrain, through a bunch of mechanical linked parts to your wheels, right? And during that, you have what are called mechanical losses, translational losses, thermal losses, and just general energy losses that kind of encompass all the other losses that you're gonna have. Now, not all cars are the same. If you had 3 cars that all had, let's just say, 100 horsepower for layman's terms to have this conversation, and you had a front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, and all-wheel drive, we're not gonna get fully into it. Your all-wheel drive will have the least amount of power because it has more linkage, more mechanical parts, because you're quite literally having to put the power to 4 wheels instead of 2, so you have more losses. What does that really mean? The VA WRX has 268 crank horsepower, but when you put it on a dyno and you look at its wheel horsepower, it makes between 205 and 220 wheel horsepower on average, depending on where you are in the United States. So there's a difference between making 100 crank horsepower and 100 wheel horsepower. I'm gonna tell you how to do both. To make, and it gets a little bit complicated because we're really close on both lines because you have to do so much to make the power on the VA. So hear me out. To make 100 crank horsepower, which is gonna get you so close to 100 wheel horsepower, right? What you need to do is have a cob access port to tune with. You need to have an intake. You need to have an electronic boost control solenoid, a 3-port specifically. And you need to have a turbo back exhaust. That's a cat back exhaust, including a J-pipe with a Jesse high flow cat. So you're carb compliant. Now, when you do all of that with average tuning on pump gas, you'll make about 310 to 315 wheel horsepower, 330 pound-feet of torque. That will get you 100 crank horsepower, because if you're assuming a 20% loss, it's usually between 18 and 25% for an all-wheel drive car, depending on where in the country you are. That's gonna get you to that 100 plus horsepower mark. You'll probably be making like 360, 370 to the crank with those configurations, which again, with 268 crank with the VA WRX, you'll pass the 100 crank horsepower of the VA WRX. That only gets you to like 315 wheel horsepower. Now, to cross, on average, if you look at the average stock wheel horsepower on a VA WRX, you probably need to be at like 320 to comfortably say you've made over 100 wheel horsepower. So all you're gonna need to do is either 2 things. You can either go flex fuel, which is not that called that anymore. You can run an ethanol blend tune, which will very much get you there, but that's not available to everyone, and that's kind of complicated. What you can actually do is you can actually just go for a top mount intercooler. You don't need to go full front mount to get this. A top mount intercooler with good aftermarket intercooler piping. And that will, with a Pro Tune or a custom E-Tune, will get you to like 325, 330 before you have to take the next step to push the car. And that's how you cross 100 wheel horsepower with a VA WRX. This video is pretty simple. That's quite literally the list. Part brands, it doesn't really matter as long as you follow, what's commercially available and what most tuners will tune and use. That's going to be your solution, and that's how you do it. So pretty straightforward video, I know. It is a lot more expensive to get a VA WRX past those 100 horsepower marks than it is a VB WRX, just based on the nature of the engine and the characteristics of the engine. And it's a little bit more complicated in terms of an install because you've got to do a boost control solenoid. And I will say, just working on a VA WRX typically is a little bit more challenging, especially with the J-pipe, just because like the second you pull a stud, it gets a little bit harder. But very fun cars to drive. So yeah, that's how you do it. And maybe a quick sneak peek on what's coming to this channel. That will be done again on this channel. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, I bought another car. It doesn't currently, it's not currently running. Let's just say there may or may not be a hole in the block. So we got a big thing coming to the channel, is the short answer. But I won't tell you too much about that now. You guys will see that in the future. I know I probably have already mentioned it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.